Hello, and welcome to this 8th episode of Ranking the World's Worst People. In this channel, we walk you through the life and evil acts of the worst people in the world, and then we rank them at the end of each episode. Our goal is to put all the worst people who have ever lived in one single league with videos that let you know precisely what they've done. So far, we've been through 7 horrible people, and I think we can say that the leader, Albert Fish, is quite far ahead. If you haven't seen that episode, then click the link in the description and come back to this episode after you've caught up. Then you can be certain that you will give a fair score after this episode. In today's episode, we will be taking a cursory look at Ilse Koch, the Bitch of Buchenwald, one of the worst commandants of the Nazi concentration camps, and maybe one of the most evil women of her era. A writer once said that everybody has to have their little tooth of power. Everybody wants to be able to bite. Humans are wired in such a way that we love to be in power and hold on to it. At this point, we tend to abuse that power. Abuse of power or abuse of authority is the commission of an unlawful act done in an official capacity which affects the performance of official duties. There is almost no limit to what a power-driven individual can go to in order to exercise his or her power, no matter how the sufferer feels. In 1658, the French philosopher Blaise Pascal said, "Humans are the glory and the scum of the universe." A lot must have happened for him to make this sort of declaration. Humans typically do things to get pleasure or avoid pain. However, one explanation is that the perpetrators of these horrors were harshly and continuously emotionally, physically, and sexually abused during childhood. Unfavorable experiences during childhood, or in the early stages of sexual development, are believed to be major contributing factors in developing a sadistic personality. It has also been observed that sadism or a sadistic nature can get created in an individual through learning. For instance, continually being exposed to situations in which pleasure or excitement is derived from the anguish of others can cause sadism. In other words, the suffering of others gives pleasure, and observing that grief feels good. Our focus today, Ilse Koch, was known for her extreme sadism and all the war crimes she committed. We will try to show you all of that today, before giving her a score on our league. If you don't agree with our score, then feel free to share the score you think she deserves in the comments section. Then we will count your score in our system and adjust our league in the final episode. Now, before we begin, please consider subscribing to our channel by clicking the button down in the right corner, as this really helps us to show this content to more people. Then we can get even more scores and really build a league based on what you, the viewers, think. Done that? Great. Let's get this episode started. Who was Ilse Koch? Born Margarete Ilse Koch in Dresden, Germany, on September 22, 1906, Koch was the second wife of Buchenwald concentration camp second commandant Karl-Otto Koch, who ran the camp from 1937 to 1941. Ilse's father was a former soldier turned factory foreman, and her mother a housewife. Although very little is known about her childhood, it is reported to have been a happy and normal one, perhaps surprising given the magnitude of crimes she was accused of committing. She became known as one of the most infamous female concentration camp figures of the 20th century. Ilse left school at the age of 15, so she was not very knowledgeable, but she trained in accountancy and bookkeeping, thereby securing a job working as a typist in a tobacco factory. She joined the National Socialist German Workers' Party, or NSDAP, in April 1933. Soon afterwards, she began working as a secretary for the party. The dominance of the Nazi Party in Germany. In the early 1920s, Germany was in complete disorder as a result of World War I. The economy was in awful condition. As a result of this, there was an opportunity for more extreme political factions to garner support from the public. It was at this time that the National Socialist, or Nazi, Party was founded, and it was against the Treaty of Versailles that had imposed punitive reparations on Germany after its defeat in 1918. It was violently opposed to communists and Jews because Jews saw the party as running global capitalism and profiting from the war. It didn't at first gain ground, But as the economic depression persisted through the decade, the Nazis became more popular. Supporters of the party believed that they had found a way to rebuild Germany's strength and bring better employment opportunities for themselves and their families. It didn't take long for the nationwide popularity of this relatively new party to become evident. By the early 1930s, the Nazis had one seat in the German parliament, the Reichstag. Some of the experienced politicians thought that they could influence the Nazis and their leader, Adolf Hitler, to win popular support and increase their own power. So they allowed the Nazis to become the leading party in the Reichstag. The rise of the Nazi Party in Germany had led to the complete breakdown of democracy in that country, and the Nazis began to take control of the state and eliminate their opponents. By 1934, opposing the Nazis was a dangerous position to take, and critics of the regime could find themselves imprisoned in a concentration camp. The first Nazi camp had opened at Dachau in 1933 with the intention of it being used to gather political oppositions. As the Nazis enforced their ideology on the population further, more groups were being rounded up and incarcerated, some of which included the Roma gypsies and homosexuals. At the breakout of World War II in 1939, the concentration camps were also being used to house and often kill Jews, whose total annihilation was one of the Nazis' main aims. From inception, the concentration camps were administered by the SS, or Schutzstaffel, meaning security squad. They were an elite paramilitary group under the leadership of Heinrich Himmler. Their mission was to protect the Nazi Party and rid Germany of all people deemed undesirable, so they were effectively put in charge of law enforcement in the Third Reich. Himmler expected the SS to live up to specific standards of behavior, even while allowing them to carry out all manner of terrible acts. For example, an individual officer stealing or taking justice into his own hands was not permitted, but for an officer to kill 6 Jews if he thought one of them was lying, that was all right. Ilse becomes an SS Aufseherin. While working as a secretary in the Nazi Party, Ilse met Karl-Otto Koch, a convicted fraudster who had gone through a number of jobs before joining the SS. Realizing that someone as charismatic as Koch, who was 10 years her senior, could give her power and privilege that she had never experienced in her life up to that point, she jumped at the offer of a relationship with him. This is not to say that there was no emotional connection between the two. Karl Koch served at a number of the first concentration camps before he was assigned to the newly established Sachsenhausen camp as a commandant in 1936. The Sachsenhausen camp was situated close to Berlin and became the training ground for SS officers who would then go on to other camps for service. The camp also doubled as the testing location for the most efficient forms of executing prisoners. Ilse accompanied Karl to Sachsenhausen and soon became an Aufseherin, a female SS guard. These female guards were recruited to supervise female prisoners, who numbered close to 2,000 at Sachsenhausen. The diligence with which Karl Koch ran Sachsenhausen pleased his SS superiors, and he was soon selected for a prestigious transfer. He was charged with responsibility to help build and then run a new concentration camp called Buchenwald, near the city of Weimar. SS officers were expected to live up to the highest standards of Himmler's morality, which included marrying a suitable woman and having children who could be raised as ideal citizens of the Reich. Before Karl and Ilse could be joined together, Ilse Kohler's ancestry was checked to make sure that her lineage was suitably pure as an SS bride. Upon passing the test, the two were joined in a torchlit SS ceremony. Sir John Dalberg Acton once said that power tends to corrupt, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. The couple took undue advantage of their new positions for all they were worth. They had a luxurious villa built next to the camp for them, as well as a zoo for the diversion of all the SS officers and their families. Despite the barbaric way in which he allowed his prisoners to be treated, Karl Koch enforced strict discipline on SS officers who mistreated the animals in the zoo. When Jewish prisoners started to come to Buchenwald in large numbers in 1938, a whole new stream of income opened up for the corrupt commandant and his wife. They took the prisoners' money and valuables for themselves, amassing a great deal of wealth. Ilse used 200,000 Reichsmarks, which will be equivalent to about 850,000 pounds in today's money, to build an indoor arena for the sole purpose of riding her horses. Bitch of Buchenwald. Being a good housewife and mother was not enough for Ilse. Buchenwald presented her the opportunity to indulge her most amoral tendencies almost without consequences. Apart from using the prisoners' belongings to enrich herself, she also demonstrated a deeply sadistic side. During her trial later on, witnesses reported that she would wear revealing clothes around the prisoners, and if one of them even glanced at her, she would note his number and report him to her husband for a severe beating. She also conducted affairs with at least 2 married SS officers in the camp. However, this was just a minute fraction of the crimes Ilse committed. During the period when Ilse and her husband Karl were at Buchenwald, a doctor known as Dr. Wagner was writing a scientific study about tattoos and how much they could be associated with criminal behavior. Buchenwald was quite suitable for a survey of this kind, as it was known to house many criminals. It was reported that Ilse Koch kept her eyes out for any fascinating tattoos on prisoners so that she could tell Dr. Wagner about them. However, the prisoners were never seen again after being taken in for examination. There were rumors flying around the camp that Ilse Koch ordered the doctor to use the tattooed skin to make household curios for her. Book covers, lampshades, even gloves, and a handbag. These terrible acts earned Ilse the name Bitch of Buchenwald. Arrests and trials. The truth always catches up with lies, no matter how long it takes, they say. This was the same for Ilse's husband, Karl. His terrible reign at Buchenwald came to an end in 1941, when some of his nefarious acts caught up with him. An investigation by the SS revealed the scale of his theft from the prisoners of Buchenwald. He ran into trouble with his superiors, not because he had stolen, but because he had kept too much for himself instead of declaring it to his superiors. They didn't let it just slide, so he was transferred to work at the death camp at Majdanek. Nonetheless, Ilse remained behind at Buchenwald. This distance wasn't a problem for their marriage because there was no marriage anymore. The only reason there was no talk of divorce was because it went against the ethos of the SS. Karl's transfer from Buchenwald to Majdanek wasn't necessarily the end of the investigation into his atrocities. The then head of the SS in the Buchenwald area, Josias, hereditary prince of Waldeck and Pyrmont, had a grudge against Karl Koch. Thanks to the dutiful storage of death records by the SS, the prince had noticed a name he knew on the death lists of Buchenwald, a medical man who had once treated him. Having ordered the case to be looked into, the prince realized that Karl Koch had engineered the deaths of this man, Walter Kramer, and 2 others at Buchenwald in a scheme to conceal the fact that he had been diagnosed with the sexually transmitted disease syphilis. Ilse wasn't left out either. In August 1943, both Karl and Ilse Koch were arrested. While Karl was arrested for incitement to murder and embezzlement, Ilse, his wife, was arrested for theft. Enough evidence was presented by the prosecutor, Georg Morgan, to show that the life of luxury that the couple lived was above that which should have been manageable on their salaries. In December 1944, Karl Koch was found guilty and sentenced to death, but his wife Ilse was acquitted. Georg Morgan was convinced of her guilt, but there was not enough evidence directly linking her to the alleged crimes, so she was let go. Death came for Karl Koch as he was shot by an SS firing squad on April 5, 1945, at Buchenwald. The camp was liberated by advancing U.S. troops just days later. By the time of the camp's liberation by the U.S. Army, approximately 65,000 had lost their lives there as a result of being shot, hanged, poisoned, or denied proper medical treatment. Ilse, on the other hand, had gone to live in Ludwigsburg with her 2 children. Her holiday was soon going to be over anyway, as she was arrested again just after the end of the Second World War, in June 1945, after being recognized by a former Buchenwald prisoner. There was almost no escape route for her this time, as she was in the custody of the American military. She, along with 30 other people formerly associated with the Buchenwald camp, faced trial which lasted several months in 1947. The unimaginable horrors of Buchenwald, Majdanek, and other Nazi concentration camps revealed by the prosecution shocked the world. The whole world followed the trial of Ilse Koch with keen interest. Ilse, the only woman among the defendants at the trial, became a symbol of the cruelty of Buchenwald and even the entire concentration camp system. However, No evidence was presented at her trial that directly confirmed the authenticity of the stories. Nonetheless, Ilse was found guilty under the common design principle, in which all defendants were considered to have committed crimes just by being part of the Buchenwald administration. At her trial, she shocked the courtroom by announcing that as a 41-year-old, she was 8 months pregnant. More shocking was that she had been kept in isolation with no contact with any men, except the American interrogators, most of whom were Jewish. It was later reported that she had conceived the child with a fellow prisoner while awaiting trial. Following the trial, the American authorities revisited the convictions and reduced many of the sentences they had handed down, including Ilse's. This was because many of the victims at Buchenwald had been German, and the American military no longer felt that they should have had jurisdiction over the crimes. Ilse Koch was released in 1951 to an outcry from the general public in the US. However, her freedom didn't last long, as she was immediately rearrested by the West German authorities and put on trial for the third time. Ilse denied any knowledge of the crimes of which she was accused. She professed only to have been a housewife at Buchenwald. During the trial at Augsburg, she collapsed twice in court and had to be removed. She was sentenced in her absence to life in prison. Over the following years, she repeatedly tried to appeal her conviction but was unsuccessful. Despite being reunited with her son, who had been taken at his birth in 1947 to be put into foster care, Ilse Koch committed suicide by hanging herself with her bedsheet in Eichach prison on September 1st, 1967. What do you think? Ilse Koch exhibited sadistic traits and committed war crimes. She was also guilty of embezzling a lot of money. However, she wasn't the only one guilty. Her husband committed as much offense as she did. How then did she become the Bitch of Buchenwald, and her husband didn't get such a nickname? Do you think that society was a bit harsh on her because she's a woman? Do you think she and her husband got what they deserved? Let us know what you think in the comments section. Ratings. As our usual practice, we would give the Bitch of Buchenwald a rating, but there are some things to consider. For one, most of the grisly crimes Ilse was accused of were not legally confirmed, so we cannot say for sure that she executed prisoners who had tattoos and used their skin for unthinkable things. We also need to consider that the crimes that she was eventually convicted for are primarily tied to her husband's actions. Considering these, we would give Ilse a 50 out of 100 on our ratings. How would you rate her? Leave a comment in the comments section. Don't forget to like this video if you agree with our score, or write in the comments if you think she should get a different one. Also, hit that subscribe button and the notification bell to get updated on our next video. If you would like to have a look at the leader of the league, press the Albert Fish episode right here. Or, if you want to hear more about the hitman and serial killer from New York, press the Richard Kuklinski episode. Until next time, goodbye.